Okay, and can you see my screen with the LibWizard dashboard?
Yes, yes.
Great. Looks like we have a good size group today.
That's great. Okay.
Every time I think the participants slows down, then one more comes in.
Yeah.
All right, so just to catch everybody up before we start, for a lot of the sessions that we've been doing for your group, we've been dividing them into sessions for admins and sessions for regular level users. And with LibWizard, we're doing something a little bit different because there's not a whole lot of setup things that need to happen for LibWizard on the admin side. We are going to break things up into sessions for everyone. So today we're going to be covering forms and surveys. And then in the next session, we'll cover quizzes and tutorials. So I will be mentioning a few things for admin level users in today's session. If that doesn't apply to you, that's okay, because I think the things that we'll be talking about are good for everyone to at least be aware of, because most of the admin level things involve privacy settings. So good things for everybody to know about, even if you don't have access to those admin level settings. Okay. So let me know if everybody's here, or if we should wait another couple of minutes before we get started.
Let me see. Yeah, I think we can start. Maybe a couple more will appear during the session, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's great. So as always with these training sessions, these are for you to learn about your products and how to use them. So if you have any questions, put them in the chat. I'll stop every once in a while and make sure we address any questions. If there's something that's a little more complex that we can't get to right away, I can always follow up with you after today's session. So again, today we're going to be talking about forms and surveys in LibWizard. My name is Jen. I'm one of the trainers here at Springshare. So I do any of the free webinars that you have access to all the time, as well as these custom sessions that your site is doing because you're part of our consulting project. So this is the first LibWizard training session for Health Services Ireland. We're going to be talking about forms and surveys today. We'll also get into some of the privacy tools at the end of today's session. So let's start out with forms. We're here on the LibWizard dashboard. And when you log in here, you can quickly go to any of these different types of LibWizard items. You might hear me refer to that LibWizard item just because it gets a little tiresome to say form or survey or quiz or tutorial. So if I say LibWizard item, it's just, any of these different types of data collection tools that you might be using. So you can quickly get to forms or surveys here from the dashboard or by clicking up here on the command bar. I'm logged in as Neve right now, so I'll see recent activity here, any of the recent LibWizard items that have been created, including one that I just made this morning, this copy of an request for evidence literature search, because we'll be looking at this form in detail so we can get a sense of the different options that you have when you're creating forms. You'll also see, Springshare news and announcements over here. And if we go into the forms area, you'll see a few different things. You'll see folders at the top. So this is a great way to be able to organize things. So we've got one that's just about contact forms. There's only one in there, but maybe there'll be more later. And if we go, no, I want to go back to forms. If we go back, we'll see forms. And if I scroll down, we'll see anything that's not in a folder, just anything that's on its own. You can also search by owner up here, so I can see just what I've created or just what others have created or everything. You can search by keyword up here. And if you wanted to create a new form, you can do so here or create a new folder and organize things that way. So let's dive into that copy of that form that I just created. So I'm going to search for that. This is a copy of an actual form that your site is using, the Health Library Ireland evidence form. I made sure I made a copy just in case we make any changes here. So if anybody's new to LibWizard, the Workpad is where you'll be adding all of your questions and information to your form. You can drag and drop fields from this field area on the left onto the Workpad, and then we'll be adding and editing these questions as we go along today. So one thing important to know about forms always display on a single page, but other LibWizard items like surveys and quizzes can have multiple pages, and they also have additional question types. So when we're looking at forms, we have some of these basic fields, we have utility fields, we have just a few multiple choice options, but there'll be more options for surveys, quizzes, and tutorials. Let's take a look at the preview of this form. This is an existing form, so I've already got a number of questions in here. When you use the preview, this won't count toward any of the live statistics, so you can test out your form, you can submit questions, and you'll actually get statistics about just this preview statistics. You can also separate that out from any live statistics. So you can see there's a banner image up at the top. If I scroll down, you can see there is a text area up at the top that has a lot of information about what folks can expect in this form, including the different types of searches that are available and the response times that folks can expect. Really, really helpful information here to include on a form. So this is the welcome screen. And then if we click begin, we'll see the form. So this is where we're seeing the whole form. It's just on that one page. For any of these required fields, we've got this customized a little bit. So it's got some extra bolding and asterisks so people know these fields are required. And you can see as we go through, let me just type in some stuff in here. I'm just going to put Springshare trainer, because that's my job title. As we start to put some information in here, you can see this is a single line text input. We might have something like if I tried to put Springshare trainer in here, this is actually looking for the correct formatting for an email address. So it's going to look for that formatting. Same thing with phone. This is a phone submitter field. So it's going to look for that correct formatting. Then there's some drop-down boxes, which categories describe your role in health services. So there's a preset option to choose from, including one that says other. When other is selected, then the patron can go ahead and type whatever they want into that other field. If we scroll down a little further, we see some radio button options. So asking the patron or the client to say which service they want. Maybe they want standard literature search. And notice when we select standard literature search, then we get some additional questions to answer. What county are you based in? So if we select that, we'll see that. But if we go back and we pick, say, comprehensive literature search, that field doesn't come up. With any LibWizard item, you have the ability to use field rules to show or hide additional questions based on what your customer or client or patron has entered into the field. Again, some more single line text areas, asking for some things like, do you have any citations? Do you have any specific criteria to include or exclude, any specific date range? All right, then I added some additional fields in here. We'll be looking at how to group these together. So whether they're radio buttons or checkboxes, notice that these are all different types of multiple choice fields. So this is a drop-down field with 3 options. With a drop-down field, you can only select one of those. With radio buttons, same thing. It offers you multiple options, but you can only pick one of them. With checkboxes, you can select one or more. So as you're creating forms, you can consider whether a multiple choice field is the right option, and then what kind of response you want to get from your patrons. Do you want a single option or multiple? Then we've got the disclaimer at the bottom. So it gives any relevant information and a little checkbox here that it's required that the patron agrees before they submit the form. And then we'll go ahead and submit. So I'm going to submit this because this is our copy. Oh, I'm going to fill these out. I'm just going to see if I can cheat really quick and get some of this in here. I'm not sure what phone number field that's going to require. I think we might have gotten them all. Let's try this. We'll see if we can ignore required. Great. Okay, so this is a great tool when you're previewing or a form. You can go over to settings, you can ignore required fields so that you can just go in and test things. You can also automatically show any hidden fields so you can see what everything looks like regardless of the path that your person is using through here. With a lot of forms, you also have this option if you want the patron to be able to get a copy of their results, you can do that. Or since they've already added their email in an email field, they can just use that email and say continue and retake the form. Okay, so that's our preview. We can also preview on multiple screen sizes. So if you want to see what this will look like on a tablet or on a smaller screen, you can see that. It's going to look best on larger screens, but it is responsive, so it will be viewable on all screen sizes. There's also options over here to preview, to get those reports for preview mode or get out of preview mode. So we'll leave that for now. So that's our live form now. We'll go back to our dashboard. We'll take a deeper look at some of the question fields and ways that you can input information into your form. Okay, so let's start out with that welcome message. When we're creating a form, you have the option to add a welcome screen. We've already got some content in here, so I'm just going to click edit. This should look pretty familiar. The welcome screen is added with just a rich text editor. So you have, all of your basic word processing kind of formatting up here. And you can add as little or as much information as you want into that text area. There's also an opportunity to customize what that begin button label says. So instead of begin, maybe it'll say, take me to the form, click save. For accessibility, I often recommend that folks skip using the welcome screen. And if we come in here, I'm just going to grab all this text, I'm going to copy it. And instead of using the welcome screen, I'm going to use one of these utilities, which is a text block. A text block is just that. It's a block of text where you can simply just add information to the screen. There's no question or anything for your library patron to interact with. So let's get rid of this. Save that. And let's preview. Oh, we still have that customized button. What I wanted to do is get away from using this button. So let's remove that as well. Save that and preview. Well, what it should do when you don't have anything in that welcome screen is it should just add that text block right up at the top and then show all of the fields below. So it just saves your users a click when you don't have that welcome screen. Same thing for the final thank you screen message. You can edit this. So this just said, thank you for your request to evidence. We'll get back to you shortly. There are a few options here on that thank you screen. That option to email the user the results of the form, that's optional. So you can turn that on or off. You can also have a button at the end, allowing users to retake the form. So again, you can have that on or off. And then you can also customize the text that displays on that retake button, retake the form, or maybe back to the beginning, something like that. So that's your welcome screen and thank you screen. So now we can look at some of the questions in our form. You have a number of different types of questions. So your basic questions allow the user to input free form or free text answers. The one-line text input, we saw that in a few places on our form, like the job title and work address. If I go into edit this, you'll see the question text, and we've made this required. And that's all that folks really need to do. They can enter a single line of text. If you want to limit, how much text folks can enter into that single line text, you can have it up to, I think that's characters, 4,096 characters. But maybe say you want to limit it to 200 characters, something like that. You can click save. There's also a bigger text area input. So if you want to add that, I don't think we have one on this form yet. All right, so here's this letter A. So we know that's a one-line text input. Let's put a text area input in here and say, tell us about your research. And then same thing here, you can have blank will be up to the maximum answer length, up to that 4,000 characters, and click save. Let's preview that. So here's that single line text, here's the multi-line text. And if people wanted to even make this bigger, they can kind of drag that and get as much information in there as they need. There's a few other basic fields. So there's a numeric input. It's just what it sounds like. It allows folks to enter a number. So something like how many, maybe not for evidence form, but in a library setting, it might be something like a librarian who's requesting copies of a book for a book club. How many do you need? And we'll say you need to enter anything between 1 and 20. The default value is going to be 1. You could have a placeholder in there. Enter number. Let's save that. And let's see what that field looks like. Of course, it'd help if I knew where I put it. Oh, there we go. How many? You'll see that number 1 is in there by default. It'll show you minimum and maximum. It's really, really tiny. But folks can either use the up and down arrows, or they can type on the keyboard what they want that answer to be. Any of those questions that we've looked at, they can be set to required, or they can be set to hidden. But one of the best practices for adding questions, don't use both hidden and required unless you've got some field rules in place to show the question. And we'll be talking a little bit about field rules in a little bit. The final basic field is date and time input. So we'll just say the basic question is when. You've got some options for the date formats. If you want the month first, or if you want the day first, day, month, year. You can set a date range. So if you want to, have this in a very specific date range, or folks can pick any date, You can exclude weekends, and you can have a time format as well. So when folks are interacting with that time field or date and time field, it'll say when. They can either click in here and they'll see that date format, or click on this and they can select a date from the date picker. So those are the basic fields. We talked a little bit about the utility fields. We talked about a text block. There's a few other just kind of quality of life utilities in there. You can use a line separator, maybe put a line before and after those two questions. So let's move that down. So when and how many will be separated by a line. Let's save those changes. There's also just a little way to add space. So maybe after that line, we want some space. There's also a field if you want your client or patron to upload a file, they can do that on your form as well. So let's look at that. Just some of those utility fields that we saw. So now that when and how many, there's that little line above, little line below, and then a little extra space. So nice way to be able to add some styling to your form, and no code or CSS is required. Okay, multiple choice fields. These allow you to kind of limit the user's responses. So you can use these when there's a specific set of options that you want the user to choose from. It also makes analyzing the form results a little bit easier when those options are kind of preset. So the dropdown and radio fields, these both allow users to select a single option. Dropdowns are useful when you have a lot of options, like 5 or 6 options. Radio buttons are going to show all of the potential choices without having the user interact, so they'll see them all on the screen all at once. So it's best for a smaller number of choices. There's also an option here in forms for a rating field. This is another one where you just get to choose one. Rating fields also do not allow you to add other as an option, but drop down and radio fields do. So let's look at that rating field. I don't think I have one in here. I'm just going to scroll down. All right, let's add this at the top so we don't have to scroll for it this time. So here's a rating field. This might appear at the end of your form. So I'll just say, how did we do? And let's say we just want to get a little bit of feedback from our patron about requesting an evidence search. How was this process? How did you find the process for requesting evidence? And then we've got some choices: great, good, fair. You can add additional options, say poor, not applicable. If you want to get rid of any of these options, there's a little trash can icon to remove them over here. You can display these vertically, just like this, or you can display them horizontally, so they'll go across the screen. You can sort them as is, alphabetical or randomly. And let's make this one required. Click Save. And now when we preview our form, here's that. How did you find the process of requesting evidence? Great, good, fair, poor. A couple other options for those rating fields. We've got radio buttons right now, but you can also use a sliding scale instead. Let's preview that. And folks can just use that sliding scale. They can use their mouse to select one of those options, or they can tab over here and use a keyboard to enter a number. So if I was using that sliding scale, I might want to add some additional text to the question. So it just says, how did we do? How did you find that process? And I might say, choose a number from 1 to 10, 10 being the best. So now when folks see that, they'll kind of have a sense of what scale you're working with and what is an indicator of the best or the worst. Oh, someone wanted to know how to edit the name of the form itself. Great. So let's get into the settings. Up at the top, you'll be able to get into the form settings. So we have a number of options that are in here to take a look at. And this is a good place to get into our settings. A lot of this you'll set up when you first create the form, but you can always come back here to make changes. So here's our basic info. If you want to update that title, you can do so here. You can also add the friendly URL so you can make it easier for folks to get to your form or survey. When you're entering a friendly URL, you can't use any spaces. So you can separate words with dashes. So we might say evidence request form like that with dashes. You can also use underscores if you prefer. So something like that. You can also update the description here. I've just used that from the original form. In the settings, there's also options for permissions. So who owns the item, who has the ability to view this form and its reports and statistics, and who can edit this form. So by default, all admin level users will be able to view and edit all of the forms on your site, but each individual form creator can select all users can edit and view this form and its report, or just admin level users and some specific regular level accounts. So you'll see any regular level accounts listed here. You can choose them from this list so they can work with you on this form. There's some options here for authentication and visibility. If you want to set up a password for this form, you can set it right here. Naturally, you need to share that with whoever is going to be filling out the form, but you can set that here under settings under authentication. There's also an option set up at the site level for libauth authentication. So there is a Koha connector option. If you want folks to log in with that method before they fill out the form, you can activate this here under authentication. There's also an option to limit when this form is going to be visible. So if you want to have it just visible for particular dates, you can choose those from the date picker. If you do have that set up though, it'll just show an error message if someone goes to that form and it's not currently visible. There's some options here for the header and look and feel. So by default, it'll use the system settings, but you saw there was a custom page header for this form that was using this image URL that had that evidence logo at the top of the page. There can also be some header text and apply any custom styles as well. For look and feel, again, by default, it's always going to show the system settings that are set by your system admin, but you can choose custom colors and fonts for the form if you want. You can click in here to select a color and just keep in mind if you are changing any colors to make sure that you've got good contrast so that it's easy for everyone to read that text, especially if you're changing the page background color or anything like that. You can play with the form size, so you know how wide that is across the page. Any of the labels on the form, so where those labels are going to appear at the top above the field, on the side, to the left or right. There's that required label. So if we wanted to customize it just for this form, we can change that up. You know, maybe it is just going to say required with, you know, just the text. You can change that up. And you can change the submit button, what that label is going to say. Send my request, something like that. You can also change up the font style. So if you want the form style, so if you want to add numbers to each of the fields or display a progress bar at the bottom or the top of the screen, I like to have it at the top, especially with a really long form. I think sometimes it's hard to see it at the top. And you can display the progress through the form in a couple of different ways. You can say the number of questions you've completed, the percentage that you've completed, or just a progress bar with no text. So let's do number of questions and save that. For submission behavior, there's a few different things we can take a look at. You can offer a review page that folks will be able to see before they submit their form. You can just toggle that on or off. After submitting the form, you can have folks redirect to a URL. So, say somebody's come to do this literature search request, maybe you want to redirect them to the evidence homepage or something like that. If you ever need to, you can also limit the number of submissions. That's probably more for like a survey or something like that, where you only want to get 500 submissions or something like that. But that is an option you have here. There's a number of email settings in here. So when a form is submitted, who's going to get that email notification for this form, and you can enter multiple addresses. So just separate those with a space. Oops, I added a comma. It says right here, separate them with a space. Do you want to include the user submission metadata? So by default, it's going to collect the user's IP address, refer URL, and browser information. So you don't need to include that if you don't want. There's some options here for the email reply to. Let me get down to my notes on this. So for the email reply to, if somebody gets that form submission notification, just going to use that default email address. But if you want the patron to be able to click reply, you can set up another email address that they could reply to. There's also some options here for conditional logic when it comes to where those submission email notifications go. This is really useful if you have a form that's used kind of centrally for a few different departments. So let's say, I'm trying to think of a good example. Let's say you have one form for all of your organization, but you want to notify folks in one particular town or city for specific submissions. You can actually route submissions to different people depending on how they answer questions in the form. So if I think we had a question in here, we said, if we chose standard literature search and they answered, what county are they based in? You could actually use that response from the form to send this request to County Cork. I don't know that you'd want to do that in the evidence form, but it's an option that you have. In most libraries, with most clients that I work with, it's more of like they're in an academic library and you'd route to different departments. So maybe you have questions about, research questions, you might route that to your reference department email, or questions about circulation and borrowing, and you'd route that to your circulation department email. You can also customize that submission notification email, what the subject line is going to say. So when staff are getting those submission notifications, they'll know exactly what form this is coming from and any additional information you want them to have about how to follow up with that. There is some reporting information. So by default, you're collecting IP, refer, and browser information, but you can shut those off. Again, that's here under settings, under reporting. There's some options for pre-filling some of these settings. You probably wouldn't want to do that with a form in here, like our evidence form. There's also the privacy scrub. So this is an important part. I'm not sure I want to get into all this right now because I was going to save this for the end. So let me come back to this later, but within a single form, in the settings, under configure privacy scrub, you do have these options for what information should be retained and what information should be scrubbed. So we'll talk more about this at the site level in a little bit, but I just want to point out that for individual items in LibWizard, you can select additional fields. So maybe we've got this name field. This is added as a name field. It's not just a free text field. This is already set up for privacy scrubbing. So in this individual form, you can't change that. But job title is just a free text field. Do we want to scrub that? We'll say yes. So you have those options to change anything that's not automatically going to be scrubbed using the site-wide settings. All right, let's go back to edit that form. Hold on, let's save that. Go back to edit the form. And let me go back to my notes and just see what else I wanted to say about fields. And all right, we talked about drop-down fields. We talked about utility fields, talked about form uploads. Oh, so within the Workpad area, you've seen we've added a number of questions. There were a number of questions already in here. One of the things I didn't point out was that there's a couple different ways to reorder the fields on the form. So you can see I added that how did we do right at the top so we could easily see it. But maybe when we're ready to publish our form, we actually don't want it here. We want it all the way at the end. One of the things you can do is you can just take your mouse, you can drag and drop that to a new position on the form. But there's a lot of questions here. Maybe I don't want to drag it all the way to the bottom, or maybe I prefer to use my keyboard. I can actually use the numbers over here on the right side and say, I actually want this one to come all the way down to the end. I think I missed it, but we'll drag that all the way down to the end and click save. So you have an option to reorder these questions even after you have added them. Okay, I want to talk about field rules, and I also want to save some time for surveys. So let me just check here and see if we got through this. Okay, great. Let's talk about those field rules. So if I click into this, you can see we've got a little number in here that said 35. So there's actually quite a few field rules for this form. I try to caution people not to use too many field rules. Fewer field rules is usually better. You can have up to 100 field rules per form. But if you need additional field rules, we have a way to group together a set of questions to minimize the number of field rules that you need. So we saw some of these in action earlier. So this is all the service list. I was just looking to see what all these rules are. Okay, so we responded to that service list question, and we said we wanted to do a quick literature search. Then it's going to show this additional question, search request standard. We also saw that if we chose, I don't remember what it was, if we chose standard literature search, then it was going to ask what county you're based in. So let's see if we can find that. Search request additional info. There it is. Okay, so if service list, if you're responding to that service list question and it equals quick literature search, then show county for routing. And notice that the short title for this is county for routing. So that's exactly why that question was answered, to be able to route that question to the appropriate local library. Okay, so you can continue adding additional field rules if you need to. You'll just click add rule over here. Oh, we might have maxed out. How many? Oh, there we go. Okay, remove that one and remove that one. All right, so when you're constructing a field rule, you'll need to know which question your patron is responding to and what you want to show them after. So let's recreate that one that we saw. So we'll say, if they answer that service list question and they select that standard literature search, then we're going to show that county for routing. So it all depends on what information you want to show or hide through the course of that form. We'll just remove that rule because that was a duplicate. All right, we'll save that. We'll go back to our form. Okay, so our form is in pretty good shape. We've got our field rules, we've previewed it, we've looked at our settings. Now, when your form is finished, there are a couple different ways you can share it. In the upper right corner, there's this little share URL button. So this gives you a couple different options. You can either copy this friendly URL, you can share with anybody you want to take the form. There's also an embed code. So there's a little widget code here with some HTML and a script. So you can paste that widget code into any website where you might want to have this form embedded. But there are some other ways to use your LibWizard items, especially since you have access to a lot of different Springshare tools. So let's see, I'm trying to think of if we want to go over to LibGuides right now. I might do that when we get to surveys. But remind me if I don't do it. We'll talk about this embed code, but we'll also talk about an easier way to add any of these forms and surveys into LibGuides just using an integration that's built in. Okay, so that's the share URL options. And then there's reports, but we'll get into that when we talk about surveys. Okay, I think that's it for forms. So I'll pause here for a second, see if anybody had any questions that are specific to forms. And then if we're all good, I'll move into surveys. We'll talk about some additional options that are available with surveys. We'll talk about those additional tools for reusing your form or survey with your other Springshare tools. And then we'll get into some of that privacy scrubbing information as well. Okay, so one question in the chat, for multiple choice options, can they be separated into different fields in the report? All right, so let's go into view the report. So we don't have any live submissions, but we do have that preview submission that we took a look at earlier. Can these be separated into different fields? So you'll see all of the data here in this data table. So when folks are responding to a multiple choice question like that professional discipline, they've selected one of those options. I guess the question is, can you narrow this down to see how many people responded this way? So you can look at that professional discipline field and see how people responded to it. Is that kind of what you were looking for? So there are those field analysis tools you can look at by question fields. If we see, let's look at that county for routing. What county are you based in? I didn't actually answer that question. We can get those numbers here. Oh, if they pick several choices. Well, let's look at the export. Actually, don't know if I have any. Let's go into a different. I don't have very good data to look at in there. So let's go to forms. Let's go to something that actually has some submissions. Oh, this looks like a fun one. Although this probably doesn't have multiple choice options selected. I'm just going to export this and see if we've got some multiple choice options here. No. I'd have to come up with an example where we can see that. I think if they pick more than one option, say like in a radio button field, you'd see the options they selected in the report, but I don't think you could separate that into different fields. You could always export it, and then you can manipulate it outside of LibWizard, but you wouldn't really be able to separate it out here in the submissions report. Okay, so I don't see any other questions in the chat right now, but if you have other questions as we go along, you can pop them into the chat at any time. But I do want to make sure we have time to talk about surveys, so I'm just going to dive right into that. Okay, so surveys are very similar. Let's go into the survey area. It's going to look just like we saw with forms, where you can look at folders, or we can create a new survey. So let's just start with a blank slate. I'm going to call this Springshare training. We can set a friendly URL, we can set a description, and we'll click save. So the Workpad is going to look essentially the same as we saw with the form. All of those share settings and reports are all in the same place. But we have a few more multiple choice fields that are available with surveys. In addition to the ones that we saw, we also have a grid field. This is kind of like that Likert scale for surveys. So maybe something like, please rate your experience with these services. And then you're going to create a grid using some rows and columns. So let's say for our rows, we want to say, I always forget which one should be the row and which one should be the header. Rows should be, I think this should be like good, great, excellent. And then our rows should be staff were helpful. I got the information I requested. Easy to use. All right, and for something like this, you can either allow multiple answers per row. With a survey like this, you probably just want to have one. So let's save that. Let's see if I did the rows and columns right. Okay, great. This is exactly what I meant to do. So please rate your experience with these services. You can get a lot of feedback in a very small amount of space. So staff were helpful, they were good, they're great, they're excellent. I kind of skewed the results a little bit here. I got the information I requested. Great. It was easy to use. It was great. So you can ask a lot of questions here right in this grid option. By using that option. A little bit better than using like the rating scale, where you might have to ask 4 different questions and set them all up individually. There's also a ranking field. So if you want to get a sense of whether something is preferred over another, let's say we're doing a survey of our library spaces. Which is your favorite, or which is your preferred space to study? So we might say seats by the windows, private study rooms, say garden patio. Okay, so with the ranking, if I preview this, with the ranking field, folks can either use their mouse to drag and drop and say, I really like that garden patio outside. And then I like private study rooms, and then I like seats by the windows. Or if someone wanted to use their keyboard, they can tab through and enter a number to rank those options. There's also an image choice field. So if you're asking a question and asking folks to maybe choose the profile image for the new chatbot, you can have a couple different images. and folks could choose from them. Which icon should we use for Chatbot? And say, let's add some images. Actually, I think I've got some Chatbot images. So let's see if I can find one. Okay, hey, they came right up. All right, so I've got my library lion. I've got my library llama. All right, and you kind of get the sense. You can add an image caption. You can also add additional alt text if needed. Or you could just link to an image that's on the web if you need to. You can sort these as you've entered them or randomly, and then I'll click save. So when you see that image field, which icon should we use for Chatbot, you just click on that to select. So those are the additional fields that you get with surveys. When it comes to surveys, they're really great for data collection, whether it's an assessment of an instruction session, a satisfaction survey, a space assessment, something like that. Your survey has all these different types of questions. So I think we've covered all of the question types pretty well. Let me see what else we might want to add. We talked about utility fields. We talked about the progress bar. So all those features will be in the same place in the settings, just like we saw with forms. One thing we have not talked about is reusing surveys and reusing questions. So you can actually save a lot of time by remixing the content that's already in your LibWizard site. So you can reuse existing questions. You can even reuse an entire existing survey to save time as you're getting things set up. You might want to update a survey, but retain the original data so you can compare it year to year. So if that's the case, you can make a new survey and just rename it, kind of like what we did with our initial form that we saw. So let me make sure, yeah, everything's here is saved. Let's just go back to the surveys area from the command bar. If we create new, we can start with a blank slate like we just did, or we can choose one of these options to copy from. So let's say, let's try that online training session evaluation. And when you copy something, it's automatically going to add this little copy in parentheses, but I want to make sure that I'm really sure that I know this is the copy. I'm going to click save. So you'll get all of those questions that are already in here. But if we go into reports, there's no submission data because this is a brand new one. So it's not going to pull over any of that reporting data. But really helps you save time when you can copy from an existing survey. You can also reuse questions. So if we click over to bank and we wanted to add some questions, you can browse through questions that have already been added to forms and surveys. If you click on the eye icon, it gives you a preview of the question. If you decide you want to use that, you can just click that plus arrow. It'll let you make any changes that you want to make to it, whether it's the question text or the choices. And you'll add that to your survey. You can also search for a question to reuse. So let's say MS Word use. All right, so when you search, that'll show which questions are available. And any of these questions that are in your question bank can be added by your site admin. So we'll look at that at the end of the session too. Okay, I mentioned earlier that you can use your LibWizard items in your other Springshare tools. So because your library might also be using LibGuides, LibCal, LibConnect. Sorry, I thought I was going to sneeze there for a second. You're using all of these other Springshare tools, so you can embed your forms and surveys wherever your patrons are interacting online. You can use that share button to get the direct link or that embed code. So let's copy that embed code and let's let's start out in LibGuides. I want to just take a few minutes to show how you can use forms and surveys and other tools. So I'll use that Spring 2 menu to go over to LibGuides. Oh, well, that was not expected. Okay, let's go to is it this one? There's LibGuides. Okay, sorry, that took me a second. There were just so many sites to choose from. All right, so we're going to go to content. We're going to go to guides, and I'm just going to create an example guide. It's going to be called Springshare example guide, and we're going to have that internal. Let's go ahead. We'll create that guide. We'll remove the profile box because we don't need that. Okay, so what I want to show you is how you could use LibWizard items in your guides. So if you're adding content to a guide, let's just add a top box, take our survey, I'll click save. I can choose add reorder when I'm adding content to a guide, and I can actually choose LibWizard item from this list. So you can select a form. You can scroll through to see what's here. And you can see there's quite a bit of content in there. So let's add that. See if I've got that up here. Let's see if we can add that Springshare training survey. We'll save that. And then this will be embedded right on the page, right in your guide. So really easy way to get that content out onto places where folks can find it. There are other ways that you can use surveys and forms in Springshare tools. So if you use LibCal, let me head over there. If you use LibCal appointments, you can put a link in your follow-up email template. So I'm going to head over to the appointments area. Well, let's go over and let's get our link first. I don't think I saved that. All right, so we're here. We've got our share URL. We'll copy this direct URL. All right, we're over in LibCal appointments. I can go into my settings. I'm going to scroll down to my, it could either be in the confirmation email to the patron or the follow-up email to the patron, just depends on when you want them to take it. You'll have the system default email in here, but you could also use a custom template. And then you can add a link in here. You just want to add the HTML markup for that. So it's a href equals, and then quotation marks, add that link, close that anchor link and say, take my follow-up survey. So if you're not used to adding links with HTML, you can always Google this, or I can share that little bit of code in the chat. But basically, it's just adding an anchor tag and then linking to that survey that you created. All right, I'm going to remove that. I'm going to go back to system default and save. Another place where you might use a LibWizard form or survey is in a chatbot. So I actually did a whole session about how to do this. If you haven't checked out Chatbot, I've got a few different recordings that you can take a look at on our training website. They're free for any Springshare users. But I want to go over to, actually, you know what? This might be a better one to show on my training site. Let me go into LibAnswers. So one thing that you'll see here in LibChat is Chatbot. We're not going to go through the whole process of creating a chatbot, but what I do want to show you is if we add a new chatbot flow for our survey, take our survey, I'll click save. And when I add an action to my chatbot flow, you'll see there's a number of options that we can add for our chatbot to serve up to our patrons, including LibWizard items. So if I have a LibWizard item that I want to show, maybe it's a survey that I've created. Maybe it's a, let's see, equipment survey. Let's do that one. We can customize the message that's going to go to our patron. Please head to our LibWizard form and fill it out. They'll get that survey. And then we can ask them if it's helpful or not, and then we can end the chat. So just wanted to point that out, that if you are creating LibWizard forms and surveys, there's a number of places you can use it. I think you also have LibConnect. So I should mention there that if you are sending an email campaign, you can get a much bigger sample for your surveys in an email campaign. And you can add those easily as well. I'm going to do that in my test site as well. So I'll just go up to my LibConnect site. I'm going to leave this. We haven't done your LibConnect training yet, but I'm just going to show you what this would look like. If you're using an email campaign, we're adding some stuff to this email template. Let's edit this. There's all kinds of content that you can add to your email template, including any of those links that you want to add, just raw HTML, or you could add a button to create a link to that survey. So let's say, let's add that button here. We've got a button, and we'll just paste that link to my LibWizard survey right in there. Folks can click the button and get to that survey. Okay, so I do want to save some time for questions, and I also want to talk about the privacy scrub options. So let's go back to your site. As you're aware, in LibWizard, your patrons submit their personal information into forms. So when you collect patron information, you have the option of how long you're going to retain that information. You can keep it as long as you like, or privacy scrubs can be set up to choose which information gets scrubbed from your site. So with privacy scrubs, you still have records of a transaction occurring for your site statistics, but things like the patron's name, patron email address, or IP addresses can be removed. Now, for your site, a privacy scrub has been in place for a couple of years, since 2020. There are a couple different types of privacy scrubs for LibWizard. You can either set up a privacy scrub for your whole site, which is what you currently have. And then there are those additional options for a particular field in a form, survey, quiz, or tutorial that we saw earlier. So the privacy scrubber is an automated process. It runs daily. And once it's activated for your system, as you have it now, any data that's older than a certain number of months will be cleared out. So admins can head up to the admin menu, go into system settings, and they can go to privacy data scrub to see what the current settings are. If we click on the details, it lets you know that any submissions for the fields below are removed after 5 months. So any changes to the privacy scrubs that are set up for your site must be requested by an admin level user. There's more information right here in your site. And the scrub is specific to field types. So if I scroll down a little bit, these are the system-wide fields that are marked for scrubbing. So any fields that are submitter name fields, submitter phone fields, or submitter email fields, that is what is currently being scrubbed from your site. Now, if you had a free text field and asked the patron to enter their name, phone number, email from that free text field, LibWizard is not scrubbing that information. It's just looking right now for those submitter fields. So if I head over to forms, actually, let me go to the dashboard because I want to get into that copy. So it's not scrubbing things like that one line text input. It's just scrubbing these submitter fields. So that at email, the contact card for name, or the phone one. And I think, oh, it must have been the other copy that we had. But it's just those submitter fields, not other fields. However, if you wanted to set up scrubbing for particular fields for your form, go into your form or survey settings, go to that configure privacy scrub. It shows this data is automatically going to be scrubbed. You don't have an option as a form editor to remove those or change those. But any of the other fields, like let's say this is a free text field and it does ask for personally identifiable information, you can say, yes, I want that scrubbed. Click save at the bottom. So going back to admins, if I go to admin, go to system settings, and go to this privacy data scrub, admins will also see which LibWizard items have those individual fields marked for scrubbing. So if I click one of these forms, it'll show exactly which ones. And these are actually all submitter fields anyway. So there's really no harm in having it twice, but those submitter fields are gonna get scrubbed anyway. Okay, let me see what other information. Currently for your site, it is retaining IP addresses. These can be collected in every LibWizard item if that collect IP address is active. So the form editor, each individual person who's making these LibWizard items can turn that collect IP address on or off. Let me see what else you might want to know about this. Oh, there's one other tool in here. In addition to the privacy data scrub, admins can also come up here to the admin menu and go to advanced. And there is an option here to encrypt form submission data. If you need that option toggled on, it's currently off for your site. You can come in here to turn that on. It's just kind of another nice privacy setting that you can set up for your site in addition to the privacy scrub. Okay, so just looking at my notes to see what else we might want to cover. We talked about widgets, we talked about, oh, a couple other system settings for admins. So I mentioned in LibWizard, generally, there's not a ton of kind of setup stuff for admins. There are system-wide settings for what to show for the page header. So you've got a custom HTML header with that EBSCO search box. You've got options for look and feel, so sending those custom colors, or even a favicon if you want to, any custom CSS styles, and also the privacy notification. So there is a banner that will display for all of the pages on your site. It'll just say this site uses cookies, as well as records your IP address for usage statistics. So that is active on all the pages for your site. There are also places to customize privacy statement or any data submission notices that you want to add to each form. In the admin area, there's also some options for language settings. So these allow you to customize the hard-coded text in your system. So kind of similar to changing the label that says required or any of those button labels, the language settings allow you to adjust the rest of the text. So any of the changes that are made here by admins in the language settings area, these are applied site-wide, so they're not for individual forms and surveys. But if you wanted to change that button that says begin for all of the forms, surveys, and quizzes in your site, you could customize that here, as well as any of this other system-generated text like previous and next, send, any of that information. You can do the same. So this is for buttons and prompts. You can also customize any of those form messages, form validation, field validation. Like it just says that's incorrect. Please try again if you want to change that message. And then the thank you page. So again, those are all available to admins under the admin menu under system settings. The final thing that I wanted to talk about for admins under this admin menu is the question bank. So we mentioned this earlier. Questions can be reused by anyone in your LibWizard system, but these are admin curated questions. So if there are anything that folks, that admins want to be able to reuse or want anyone to be able to reuse, they can be added here to the question bank. Just clicking on add to question bank, selecting the type of question, and then that will be available in all of your items. All right, so we've covered a lot. We talked about forms and surveys today. We talked a lot about the different field types that are available for forms and surveys. We talked about reusing questions from the question bank. We talked about using field logic in your form or survey. We talked about some of the admin settings. We also talked about some of the tips for surveys, including using utility fields, adding that progress bar, reusing questions and reusing whole surveys or forms. We talked about how to reuse your surveys in other Springshare tools like in LibConnect, LibAnswers, and LibGuides. Oh, and LibCal. And we went over those privacy scrub options. So I'll stop here and see if folks have any questions. If there's anything else that you would like to see about forms and surveys, just let me know.
Thanks, Jen. As you said, we covered a lot. I believe it's great because if you're a single user that just need it for a couple of things, the first part is really useful. And I didn't know how deep you can go with this thing, so I will go through that again. Thank you so much. I don't know if there is any question in the chat.
No, I don't see any other questions. We will have a follow-up training. We'll cover quizzes and tutorials. So
Yeah.
since we got all of the admin stuff out of the way, quizzes and tutorials will get a little bit more in depth. There's a cool thing about tutorials, which is that you have a couple options. You can create standalone tutorials that are embedded in a page, or you can create, excuse me, you have standalone or embedded tutorials. So lots of information to cover there. And we'll look at scheduling that in the near future.
Great. Yeah, that's the cliffhanger. Yeah, I have
just the
been
teaser
the,
for next time.
Yeah. There is a lot you can do with tutorials. I think that's pretty interesting, and forms and surveys are probably going to be the things we use the most in an everyday basis. So it's very useful to have this and to be able to try this and all the things you can achieve with this. Okay, so thank you, Jen, and that's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay,
So yeah, I'll
thinking.
send that recording link out later today. It'll just take like an hour or
Thank
so
you.
to process.
Yeah,